Thank you, Forrest. Thank you, Orko. Thank you, Brian. I have two disclosures. One is that I brought notes because I flew in this morning, and so if I just forget what I'm saying, I'm going to look down. And number two, somebody in this room may have said that this shouldn't be a sciencey talk, which I did think was a little ironic since it's a science summit. So my talk is not that sciencey, but it's actually about the history of the female athlete, and most of the decisions about female athletes were not based on science. So it actually makes some sense. So to talk about the female athlete, we need to go back to ancient Greece. In 776 BC, we had the first Olympics. Of course, women were not allowed to participate or even attend those Olympics, and they were held to honor Zeus and the gods, to appease the gods, and to combat the plague. Later on, the women were allowed to participate in the Heron Games, and that was to honor the goddess Hera. And then the Spartans allowed some women to train alongside with men because they believed that strong women could then produce strong warriors. Plato, however, was ahead of his time, and he really believed that women should have an active role in society. We move on to the Roman Empire, and during this time, really, only a few rare elite women were allowed to participate in sporting events. There were some women that were allowed to be gladiators. They were known as gladiatresses. Singular would be gladiatrix. I caution you, if you're going to Google that, you're going to maybe go down a different line of images. So just let's move on. We get to the Middle Ages, and this was about 1700 to 1500, late 1400s. And really, women didn't have any opportunity for sports. They were busy doing physical labor. They were working alongside men in the fields and the farms. There were many reasons that this was called the Dark Ages. So then we get to colonization. And Mary, Queen of Scots, was thought to be the first woman in Scotland to play golf. This was around 1567. But overall, English common law was not very good to women. Women really were considered non-existent. They had no rights. They weren't allowed to own any land. And they were really thought to be the weaker sex. Just to drive that point home, they were given names like weaker, pious, and obedience. So then we move on to the 1800s, and women started to get some traction in the 1800s. In 1811, there was the first women's golf tournament, and then in 1875, a women's university called Wellesley College was opened in the United States, and they actually required that women participate in physical education. They also started the first women's rowing team. And so now doctors were starting to think that maybe women could use their brains and maybe they could exercise as long as they didn't do too much of either one, because that would take away energy from the womb. And one of the doctors in Boston who was well known and prominent there, Dr. Edward Clark, said that muscular and brain labor must be reduced at the onset of menstruation, again, focusing on the importance of the womb. In 1884, Maud Watson won the first women's single competition at Wimbledon. And then in 1896, the Olympics returned. Now we had the modern Olympics, but again, no women were allowed to participate, and that was thought because they were run by nerves and not muscles. So we get to 1900, and finally women get to slip in there, and they participate in the second modern Olympics. They participate in 5 events, 2 specifically for women, tennis and golf. And Charlotte Cooper was the first woman to win a gold medal. She won it in tennis. In 1902, figure skater Madge Syers of Britain entered the men's world championships because there wasn't an opportunity for women to have their own world championships, but she placed second, so she did all right. However, the IOC founder and the person who brought the modern Olympics forward, Pierre de Coubertin, was not a fan. He said any Olympiad with females would be impractical, uninteresting, unaesthetic, and improper. So in 1922, the women had been banned again from the Olympics, and they decided to form their own Women's World Games, and this helped get them back onto the world stage and allowed to participate again. In 1924, figure skating was the only sport for women at the first Winter Olympic Games, and then 4 years after that, Sonja Henie, who was a Norwegian, did an amazing job and started her amazing figure skating career in the ladies' singles. So in 1928, 1932, and 1936, she won a gold medal in that event. She won 10 world championships in that event, and she won 6 European championships. In 1931, Vern Mitchell became the first woman in professional baseball. Now, Babe Ruth was not super excited about this, and he said that women couldn't play baseball day in and day out because they were too delicate. So there was an exhibition game, and Vern Mitchell struck out Babe Ruth and Lou Gehrig. However, later that year, the baseball commissioner banned women from baseball. In 1932, Babe Didrikson won gold in her 3 events at the Olympics. However, a reporter suggested that she would just do better if she stayed home, prettied up, and waited for the phone to ring. In 1948, Alice Coachman was the first black woman to win Olympic gold. And then in the 50s, there was a prince from Liechtenstein who was also on the IOC, and he said, you know, it would just be better if these women would stop trying to look and act like men. So in the 60s, they actually started to wonder if these people were men, and they forced them to go through this horrible process of having international genital checks to prove that they were women. Soon after that, they all had to be subjected to doing genetic testing, and up until the late 90s, every woman that participated in the Olympics had to prove that she was actually a female. We get to 1966, and Roberta Gibb became the first woman to run and finish the Boston Marathon. She did it in 3:21, which was pretty impressive at the time. However, people really didn't notice, nor did they want to talk about it, because she wasn't even supposed to be there. They weren't allowed to enter. And that brings us to the next year, to Kathryn Switzer. She was a little more clever about it, and she decided to enter as KV Switzer using her initials. So she entered the race, she was running along, and then one of the officials came up and he said, "Get the hell out of my race," and tried to push her off the course, physically trying to slam her off the course. And you can see from this picture, there's this other kind of brawny guy who happened to be Kathryn's boyfriend, who then pushed the official off the course, and she was able to finish. So she's the first woman to actually finish the marathon with a registered number. So she's considered one of the pioneers of the Boston Marathon, and helped allow women to enter the Boston Marathon officially by 1972. And she did all this despite being told multiple times that it was likely, if she kind of ran these lengthy distances, that her uterus would fall out. So far it hasn't. So then we get to 1972. And 72 was a huge year in the United States, and that's because of Title IX. So this was a law that was passed that said no person in the United States shall, on the basis of sex, be excluded from participation in, be denied the benefits of, or be subjected to discrimination under any education program or activity receiving federal financial assistance. So in the US, what this meant is if you went to a public college or you went to a public institution, if there were 50 opportunities for men to participate in sports, there had to be 50 opportunities for women to participate in sports. And those different things that they were given to help them succeed also had to be available to women. And that caused a huge blossom in terms of what could happen in terms of women's participation. So from 1972 to 1978, there was a 600% increase in women's participation in athletics. So then we get to 1973, and we get to the battle of the sexes. So Bobby Riggs was a tennis player who was pretty cocky and was pretty darn sure that he could beat this phenom, Billie Jean King, who was doing very well on the women's tennis circuit. So he said, there is no way that I can't beat this woman. I could do it with a hand tied behind my back, and was really flaunting and talking up a big game. So they ended up playing in this exhibition tournament. And what happened really can be best described by a Sports Illustrated writer who said, what in the world kind of situation are we living in which the woman not only beats the man, but she swamps him. She outplays him, outclasses him, outpsychs him, outnerves him, and beats the living bejesus out of him. And that's exactly what happened. So we get to 1984, and now women are finally allowed to enter the Olympics in the marathon. And we get Joan Benoit Samuelson, again from the United States, and she wins the marathon in 2:24:52. And she does this after she went to trials 17 days after having arthroscopic surgery on her knee. Her uterus also didn't fall out. We move on over to 2012, and all 200 plus countries that participated in the Olympics had women as part of their athletic contingent, which was a huge deal. And none of their uteruses fell out, including Carrie Walsh Jennings, who is a female beach volleyball player from the US, and she won a gold medal while she was pregnant there. In 2016, women won more total medals than men in 29 countries. And this is pretty exciting because now teenage girls make up the fastest growing segment of children and adolescents in organized sports. This is good because we know that female athletes have greater bone density, they have higher self-esteem, they have decreased depression, decreased drug use, more body image, positive body image, they have less risk-taking behaviors, and they actually have higher graduation rates from school. We know that over half of top corporate executives were college athletes, and we know that women that were affected by Title IX 20 to 25 years later have lower BMIs, they have less obesity, and they're still more physically active than non-athletes. So how many of you here know about the awesome Irish double that got a silver medal at the Olympics and were so fun to listen to in their interviews? They were really fast and they loved their podium pants. Most people here. Now, how many of you know about Jenna Jennings? Not quite as many. So Jenna Jennings is a major rock star, and this is not to take anything away from the O'Donovan brothers, but Jenna Jennings is a world champion. She went to medical school, she became a practicing physician, got married, had 3 kids, came out of retirement, went back to Rio, and came in 6th in the lightweight women's double. I think that's worth being on the news as well. That's right, exactly. But it's not all roses for women. There are differences between women and men, and we know that. We know that women have a higher rate of ACL tears. We know that they have more knee maltracking, so they can have more patellofemoral syndrome and knee pain. Their symptoms and their recovery from concussion may be different. We know that they suffer from female athlete triads, so reduced energy availability and that interaction with menstrual dysfunction leading to low bone density. And we know that they likely have more symptoms and consequences from relative energy deficiency in sport, or RED-S. We know that it's harder for them to build muscle because they don't have as much testosterone. They tend to be more flexible, so they're more likely to have subluxations and dislocations from non-traumatic injuries. They may need to modify exercise when they're pregnant or during the postpartum period, and they may be motivated a little bit differently. So I think if we take a step back, I personally, as a physician, as a female, as a scientist, as a former athlete, as a feminist, as a mother, definitely want to be pushing and trying to help these women prove that their anatomy and their physiology don't need to stand in the way of their participation in their excellent sports performance. I think our job is really to scientifically dispel the myths that have been out there about women and what they can do. And maybe we should stop thinking of these things as hindrances, but try to figure out the differences between women and men and see if they can be using them to their advantage. So maybe we time the menses in terms of performing and time the period in terms of periodization of training. Maybe we take advantage of the vasodilatory response and the effects of estrogen. Maybe we start to determine more about when the best time during the menstrual cycle is to train and how the effects of oral contraceptions or oral contraceptive pills really play in. All these studies are so small, and that's because it's very hard to study women. We have to get them in the same phase of the cycle. There's so many things to control for, and a lot of people want to shy away from that because it's more complicated. You have to do daily blood sampling or urine sampling. It's expensive. It's hard to coordinate. So I challenge you, the scientists in the audience, to take advantage of this. We now know that there are over 45% of the competing Olympians are women. So these are a population you should be studying, and they're tricky. So go for it. I think it's really our job to be doing this because this is our future. By doing these things and by doing these in countries where we can really afford to study women, we're empowering girls everywhere, and we're empowering them in different aspects of their life. And so we really want to go back to thinking like Plato. And Plato said, is there anything better in a state than that both women and men be rendered the very best? There is not. Thank you.